Today I'll be breaking down step by step why your relationship is destroying your business. Now, as a passionate business owner, the thing that we most want to follow in life is our purpose. We want to seek that fulfillment. There's something deep within us where we've had this thought in our brain ever since we were young, or even in our early 20s, when we're like, I'm destined for something great and I'm going to go after and get it. And what happens is, through our own entrepreneur's journey or through our own hero's journey, we start piling on habits and ways of being that make us feel like we're just forcing things in our life. And when we first started, we probably felt really magnetic, like, oh, these things come to me, this is a good opportunity. And then we fall into this trench, and there's this tunnel that we have to go through. And without going through the tunnel intentionally, by learning the skills of charisma, confidence, magnetism, and anything that's going to help you get there, then we can just stay there. And what our life looks like is terrible relationships. We feel burnt out in business. We feel dopamine addicted. We feel invisible from people. We feel like our team don't listen to us. We feel like our clients don't listen to us. We see other people making the deals in business that we want to make, and for some reason we just feel exhausted and stressed out. So I'm going to break down the exact process that I've used and that you can use in here, and one that I've also helped all of my clients use to overcome this. And this is just getting prepared to implement boundaries, right? There's a video that I've done here previously, which is an introduction to boundaries, understanding what they are, what they stand for, where they come from. There's some shadow work in regards to that, to inner child healing, which is like, oh, how did I get these patterns of boundaries, right? And once we identify them, it makes it easiest for us to let them go. Essentially, we go, oh, this is where I don't have boundaries or do have boundaries, and these are the different categories that they're in, and this is how I can get rid of them. And yeah, in this video, I'm going to be explaining you through what it looks like to prepare your boundaries and start implementing them. So let's go. So there's one model I want to talk about here, and it is the transformation model, and it is 3 different levels of boundaries. And in here, this is super important to know, is level 1 type of boundaries are called subtle boundaries. These are boundaries that are flexible but important, right? You're okay to let these ones go, and if someone doesn't know, you can give subtle hints of understanding, like, this is maybe a boundary that you've crossed. These are preferences to improve relationships in general. And boundaries, by the way, especially all of these levels, are a key core pillar of masculine social dynamics, which is what I teach men in my Set the Standard community, by using different social techniques so that you can bend reality to your will and create what you want. This works best for people who are 6 to 7 figure entrepreneurs, who have done the materialistic thing, who have done the chasing success thing, and now they're like, it's still not enough. I need more. And it might be more success or bigger deals, or it could be more fulfilling relationship, or it could be just getting in touch more with yourself. Either or, this is one of the core pillars that help you get that. So back to subtle boundaries. Essentially, they help you. Like, an example of it would be, I need personal time in the morning before socializing, right? I'd appreciate it if you knocked before coming into my room. Hey, I prefer this. So whatever it is subtle boundaries are preferences, to make it simple. So you can say, I prefer this. Someone says, do you want pizza, pasta, or steak cooked in butter for dinner? Well, I definitely prefer steak cooked in butter, but if there's healthy pasta or pizza option, because I have really high health values, then maybe I'll opt in for that this time, but I still prefer this. And the key for subtle boundaries is being able to communicate gently your preferences, right? Because when you can communicate that, then it buys people in. They go, oh, this is that person's preference, and then they start building up an identity of you. And when you get good at communicating them, when people start building up the identity of you, that confirms your beliefs about yourself, reinforcing your identity. So I believe identities get created, and they get created internally and externally, and putting in your boundaries helps you reinforce that you want to create. So when people say create yourself, be the person you want to be, it's like, well, how the fuck do I do that? It's like, well, work on your boundaries, right? Which is what we do in Set the Standard. Level 2, negotiable boundaries. So these are important, right? So these ones are a little bit more of an enforcement to these boundaries, but they are negotiable. Now, notice the key word there, negotiable. So this means that if you are to cross this boundary of your own that is there, you negotiate it. You don't just say, hey, this is it. This is a negotiable boundary. So these boundaries can have room for adjustment based on the context of the relationship. So most of the time you don't want to completely cross this boundary, is you're negotiating the terms for it. So an example is, I prefer not to discuss politics with friends, but if we do, I expect respect in disagreements. Expect respect, what a sentence. Or I don't always like hugs in certain situations. No, I don't always like hugs, but in a couple of situations, I'm okay with them depending on who they are. Now that's like a communication example around physical boundaries. If you listen to the last video, you'll notice the difference. There's 4 types of boundaries: physical, spiritual, mental, and emotional. Number 3, non-negotiable boundaries. So these ones, they ain't be getting crossed, right? There's no negotiating, right? This is my boundary, and this is an absolute no, you do not cross this, right? These are your limits, bro. So these are firm boundaries that you will not tolerate being crossed. And if they are, you must take immediate action, and there will be consequences for these. There have to be consequences. If you don't put in consequences to your non-negotiable boundaries, then you will look like a fraud and always be trodden over. So you have to fight for them, right? If you don't fight for your boundaries, you'll never have them. So an example will be, I won't engage in relationships where I'm constantly disrespected. I do not tolerate physical aggression or yelling at me in anger in any way, shape, or form. So it's important to know these, but what a lot of people haven't done is actually written them down. The definition of a boundary is just a line that that 2 parties or more are aware of not to cross. That is the definition of a boundary. In the dictionary, I'm pretty sure I've nailed it almost word for word. So if you go and look at what that is, so as an agreement or a line that I've put in here, we both know that we're not allowed to cross it. But a lot of people don't even know their boundaries. They just think, why are you doing this to me? Or how come this always happens? And they haven't even laid down a boundary. So someone else may not even know what that boundary is. And then it's being crossed, you're getting angry and resentful. And then if you haven't input boundaries before, you're not confident doing that, or you're quite introverted, then what happens is there's a lot of resentment builds and a lot of negative tension gets built between 2 parties or more. And what happens for that is bad communication, people get avoidant, people get attached, and it's just a shit show. So this is why high-level people work on boundaries so often and negotiate them and talk about them. But the key here is basically you want to stick to your word, because if someone can repetitively crosses your boundary, you got to escalate enforcement. So it's like gentle reminder, serious talk, consequence, distance, right? So just a question to ask you is, what are your current boundary levels, right? Does this sound important to you? Does this sound like something that you need to be working on? It's like, oh, I need to be working on these boundaries. Does this sound familiar? You're like, oh, that's me. I really need to get my non-negotiable boundaries down pat. So I'm just going to ask you the questions here so you can think about it in your brain. Is non-negotiable boundaries, what are the absolute limits for you that can't be crossed? 2, negotiable boundaries. What boundaries for you, things in your life that you would like to be flexible but important, that you can actually negotiate on? And then subtle boundaries. These are your preferences, communicating your preferences. What preferences do you have that you'd like to communicate that only needs to be communicated, right? So model number 3. Right, and I hope that was really helpful for you guys. But model number 3 is the phase of boundary development. So there's 3 phases of boundaries. Well, there's 3 different kinds. I'd say these are 3 different kinds of boundaries. One is passive boundaries. So there's passive boundaries, reactive boundaries, and conscious boundaries. So passive boundaries are essentially just not knowing your boundaries, where people just come and cross them all the time. You struggle with asserting your needs, you avoid conflict, and you also avoid compliance too. I don't want to do that thing because someone told me to do this. That's just a symptom of you not having good boundaries, and then jealousy that person can communicate their boundaries, which builds resentment in you because you're comparing yourself to them, and you're only comparing because you haven't got the skill and awareness of your boundaries. Whoa, does that sound familiar? Does that make sense? Do you know someone that's like that? Are you a bit like that? So the shift is basically focusing on just recognizing that you have the right to set boundaries. You're allowed to, right? It's a normal thing. With reactive boundaries, right? This is setting boundaries in a aggressive or defensive manner, right? Where your tone of your voice is escalating. You shut down in your body. Like, oh, you shut down. You get passive aggressive. You feel bored. You feel frustrated. And you communicate it in a way where you may feel a little bit guilty afterwards, where you've snapped at someone. You've just been like, you've said something sharp or prickly and you go, oh, I wish I didn't say that. Or you know that it's coming up when you're about to say it. Then as you're about to say it, you're thinking to yourself, don't say this thing, don't say this thing. And then, oh shit, I just said it, right? So that is knowing that you have reactive boundaries. And the strategy is to Learn calm and assertive communication techniques, and as well as being able to distance yourself and reassure the other person, because you can't escape and distance yourself completely without feeling guilty if you don't know how to reassure someone else and basically communicate your boundaries of needing some time and space before you come back in and explain what's been coming up for you. And then conscious boundaries, which is setting boundaries deliberately and respectfully with awareness of both your needs and the other person's needs, right? So essentially you're continuously refining your boundaries as you grow and your needs changes, and you'll have it in the back of your head to take track and stock of your boundaries and which ones are non-negotiable and subtle, right? So just being aware of what they are gives you the freedom to communicate in a way which makes you become more magnetic and more attractive, because now you're creating polarization. You're never going to magnetize anything in your life that you really want without the polarity of it almost not being there. You have to create some sort of void and gap where things can come to you, and that's done through positioning and framing. And boundary is basically self-respect, framing and positioning, mainly framing, but you gain position whilst having the boundary development. And position is just being in the position of having a high level of influence. For example, if you're hosting a party and you're the person who hosts the party, or the party hoster, you're gonna have greater influence at that party than anyone else. You can come in and walk into the room and be like, hey everyone, go outside, and everyone will just go outside because it's your place, right? And you have positioning, right? But let's say, for example, you don't know one person at a party, you're the only one there, things go silent, not the only one there, there's heaps of people there, you don't know anyone else except for one of the side friends, and then you say, hey everyone, let's go outside. Everyone's gonna be like, who the hell is this guy and why did he tell me to go outside, right? No, right? You're not the host, so your influence is a lot lower, your positioning lower, right? So that's essentially the boundary model. Now, with the understanding conscious boundaries, there are a couple of things that influence conscious boundaries, reactive boundaries, and passive boundaries. And essentially, it's self-reflection to gain awareness of your boundaries, which is why I asked you those questions before. Hope that makes sense. And then it's having the level of being able to enforce your boundaries, and then having the right environment to enforce your boundaries. So if you're like a leader in business and your whole team is being completely chaos and it's all because of one person, don't tell them off in front of everyone and embarrass them and shame them. Instead, when you're in a situation like that, if they've gained positioning or any social influence, and then you're trying to influence them, and they've got the power of the group around them, you don't pay us enough, blah, blah, and everyone gets on board. Now they've got more positioning than you do. But if you take them out to a coffee shop and you have a personal, deep, heart-to-heart, one-to-one conversation with them to understand what their needs are, your positioning is greater because you're the boss, right? So that is your environment. And then every time you grow personally, you grow in business, you grow more in love in your relationship, you've gone through new growth, next minute new boundaries have to be created, and you might notice your unconscious boundaries might be passive or reactive, right? So they're all most of the time unconscious, right? So I hope that makes sense. Do you understand how that works? Are you like, wow, that's me, I've got passive or reactive boundaries? Or you're like, actually, some of my boundaries are quite conscious because I've got the awareness and I've been able to implement them, right? If you don't, this next section here is extremely important. This is a boundary enforcement model, right? So I'm going to teach you how to enforce your boundaries like an absolute G, so no one can ever mess with you again. This creates polarization, again, making you become more magnetic so that you can get the things that you want, whether it's human behavior, whether it's a thing, an opportunity, a business deal, a date, more success in your relationship in general, right? So essentially you've got 4 different types of boundaries, which is mentioned before: intellectual boundaries, emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, and spiritual boundaries. And essentially, to plug these in, is you want to acknowledge your boundaries, communicate your boundaries, enforce your boundaries, otherwise exit from the boundaries, right? So this enforcement model basically means that, number one, you have to know your boundaries. This is the awareness phase. To get to conscious level boundaries, you have to become conscious of the boundaries. So you basically want to identify when a boundary has been crossed. So when you're talking to someone and a boundary has been crossed, having the ability to know if it's a mental, physical, spiritual, or emotional boundary is extremely important, because then you can speak it. That was a boundary that's been crossed. Then you can run through it. Do I need to subtly communicate this? Is it negotiable? Or is this a boundary that's non-negotiable that's been crossed immediately? Just to know that. That's number one. That's all it is. You don't have to say or do anything. It's just like, which is this, right? Analyze this first, especially if you're triggered. Number 2 is communicate it. So clearly articulate your boundary using your words and your body language. So open body language always makes it so much more inviting for someone to listen, because the second you close your body language, they go, oh, I'm going to be attacked. I don't want to listen to this, right? So that's essentially it. That makes sense. And then stage 3 is enforce. So this one is where you're applying consequences, but not punishments. How annoying is it when you get punished for something that you didn't know, right? So if anyone crosses your boundaries, you're putting in a preference or talking about a non-negotiable, just assume every single time that no one knows your boundary, unless you've explicitly had a conversation with them, and then give them opportunities to grow, because humans aren't like robots. We don't learn one thing straight away. We have to create new patterns in our brain, which actually takes a while. So I want you to give your partner a little bit of slack if you have a partner. If you're having struggles in the dating world, give it a little bit of extra time. And if you're struggling in business and in regards to team or closing deals or getting things done on social media, give it a little bit more time. People don't know, they have to learn you. They've got to see you multiple times and understand how you work, right? So this is done by enforcing, especially if the boundary continues to be crossed. So think about enforcing as education, right? We want to educate people. This is our boundaries, right? But especially if it is a non-negotiable one that's been crossed, you do want to put in consequences. Hey, this is a boundary of mine that's been crossed, and if it continues, I'm going to distance myself, right? And then stage 4 is if someone repeatedly disregards your boundaries, then it's time for you to distance yourself. And it's family, friends, relationships, team members. If someone, it's really important to note, especially with staff. If you have staff and they're not adhering to what you're saying, you're having performance reviews and you keep having to tell them what to do all the time, and they might be doing something that's off, then you have to know that you have to distance yourself, right? Because you can keep enforcing, but if that's not working, you got to create a void. Because that void that you create is going to create some magnetism. It's actually not so much a void, it's more just polarization. Hey, we're going to decrease your hours, we're going to let this thing go, blah, in order to distance yourself. It's the same thing with dating, it's the same thing with relationships. You want to start distancing yourself because it's not serving you and you have to live to your own values. I remember having this moment to myself, I'm just thinking in regards to relationships. I was like, because when I grew up as a kid, we had a pretty chaotic household in regards to reactivity from my parents. And I remember being in a situation where in relationship, I kept picking people who had the same trauma as my mum. And I have a fantastic relationship with my mum now. But there was just moments when mum as a normal human was just going through what she needed to go through in life, right? It's just every human goes through some crazy stuff. So she was in a hectic moment in life when I was young and living with her at some point, and I received a lot of reactivity from her. I don't blame her or judge her for that at all. It's actually normal for what happens, and I feel like people at that time need to be held a lot more. And during that time, I remember this is something that I don't want. And then in the future, I started picking relationships with women who would act out the same thing. And I was like, oh my goodness, never again do I want this to happen. But it only happened because even though I was enforcing my boundaries, I never listened to my values and adhered to my values and distanced myself enough in order to create the polarization of attraction to allow that person to actually change, right? So instead of just enforcing, then I would never retract and create some distance, allowing that person to either change or give them an opportunity, or listening to my values and actually slowly exiting from something that isn't serving me and my values. So this is what it's like when you actually have to fight for your values, which is insane when you think about it. This is how powerful these things are. Does this make sense? You're thinking about this like, oh my goodness, that is 100% me. Maybe different situations and scenarios, but you can see the power of this, right? It's extremely powerful. So in the strategies for these, I'm just going to go through intellectual, emotional, physical, and spiritual boundaries and just giving you a couple of different examples. And then I'm going to run you through really quickly in terms of how you can rewire your own boundary reactions, right? Which I think is extremely important. So with intellectual boundaries, if you start practicing saying, I disagree in low stakes situations, becoming disagreeable, it's a personality trait that you can learn, right? And we all want to have a moderate level of disagreeableness because we don't want to become people pleasers. We don't want to become nice guys. Nice guys aren't actually nice. That's the thing. They just try to make everyone believe that they are. Journal about your beliefs, actually writing them down. Engaging in debates where you can articulate and defend your viewpoint. Well, my viewpoint is this, so why do you think like that? So I have different beliefs than you. Can you help me understand that a little bit better? I'm not sure that you're 100% right because of my viewpoint, right? So just actually getting into conversations where you can have intellectual debates It's so powerful. Regularly review decisions to ensure that they align with your values. This can be with a coach, this can be with a friend, this can be with yourself, this can be with journaling. Emotional boundaries. This is just taking a moment to identify emotional triggers. What's that emotional trigger? And prepare responses. Is learning to recognize and express your feelings directly. I feel, it's not saying, I feel like you were doing this, right? If you said that, that is not a feeling. If you say I feel, you have to label that emotion. I feel confused every time you do this, right? It has to have an emotion, otherwise the I feel statement is incorrect. Disagree with me on that one. Politely disengaging from overly emotional interactions, right? And then notice if you feel guilty about that, for distancing yourself. Keep a private space for emotional decompression. This is so important. A lot of men just keep grinding and crushing and hustling without actually taking the time to process emotions. Physical boundaries. Communicate your comfort levels with touch clearly. Step back or away if someone invades your personal space, and use body language to show when you are uncomfortable. This is maybe uncomfortable, or there could be someone, for example, just a cracky on the side of the street who's just acting like a larrikin, and it's you and a hot date sitting there. So I was like, let's position my chair so that my back is facing them a little bit, and I put her into a position where she's more safe, right? Or move, right? If things feel a little bit dangerous. Spiritual boundaries. Create a daily practice to connect with your spiritual side, such as meditation or breath work. Set aside time for solitude and reflection to deepen your connection with yourself. Protect your energy by avoiding environments that misalign with your spirit, and trust your intuition and honor the inner guidance that comes through stillness, right? These are all stillness practices, and understanding your purpose and taking time to just let it all land, right? So these are all strategies that you can use when you are enforcing your boundaries. So when you're aware of your boundaries, you've communicated your boundaries, now it's time to enforce them. These are all different strategies that you can use prior to distancing yourself, or when you need to distance yourself, how to actually communicate it, right? And now we're getting into rewiring your boundary reactions, because we're all human, we're gonna get triggered. And if we're not getting triggered, then most of the time we're stuffing shit down, or we're in a stage in our life where we need to be challenged. We're ready for the next leap, baby, because if you're not getting triggered, it's like you're not growing, essentially. Growth has a positive and dark side to it, right? And triggers are a part of the dark part, which just work, by the way. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps for this. Number 1 is awareness, again, which is like, what response did I default to? And if you watched the video earlier, like the video before this, you'll find out that you've got flight, fright, freeze, and appease, which is all just nervous system traits that happen when you're triggered, which we all know about, which come from having our boundaries crossed. Does that make sense? You're like, oh, nervous system, that makes sense, I get it. The fright, flight, freeze response. So this is that, right? So the awareness when it comes to reactions of boundary, which one just happened to me? Then reframe the story. Recognize that past boundary violations were not normal and are not a standard for you in your future. So if something is this trigger coming from a past story that's happened to you when you were a kid or in a relationship or something like that, where it used to be there? And it doesn't have to be there anymore, but you're still triggered about it. And you go, whoa, what's this coming up? And it's usually these ones when you need to reframe the story, usually aren't that big of a deal in the moment, but sometimes they are, depending on what your nervous system experienced when you were younger. So you might go into a state of freeze. Why I'm in a freeze state right now? I'm feeling unsafe because of XYZ reasons, because when I was a kid or when I was younger, these things happened, right? And then the important reframe is, this no longer serves me. It's not a standard for my future. I am safe, right? And then you practice small boundary wins, third stage. So this is start enforcing minor boundaries in everyday interactions. I need space right now, instead of just withdrawing or running away. What I prefer is this, right? So when you understand what the trigger is, you've been able to reframe the stories. What am I gonna do later this day or tomorrow to reinforce this? Then actually have a win. It's a good thing that you implement boundaries. Like my friends and anyone in my inner circle, anytime someone puts a boundary in, we high five and we're like, hell, good on you. Insert that boundary. Even if sometimes people feel extremely uncomfortable, or you make someone feel uncomfortable, or has the feeling that maybe you let them down, right? And it's like, oh, I don't want to let anyone down, I feel guilty about this. It is better to let someone down than to ruin your life and other people's, right? This is the whole put the mask on yourself before you put it on the baby in the plane thing, right? So next stage, use the pause response. So before reacting, take a moment to assess, right? And you can do that by just labeling what's happening. You go, oh, I'm in a freeze state right now. I'm fleeing. Oh, I need to separate myself right now. Can I have a moment? You might be fighting. I'm feeling really aggressive to you right now. I'm feeling really aggressive and it's like I feel like I need to snap. I'm not going to because I've caught it, but that's what's coming up right now. Or when you laugh and you appease, appeasing is when you're laughing or, oh no, that's okay, everything's fine, it's a very nice guy, or you go and then crack a joke. You might notice, oh, I'm actually think I'm a little bit triggered, but I'm definitely using humor right now. You know what I mean? You can just label it in the moment what's coming up in order to start identifying your boundary. And then the last one is reprogram self-respect. So treat your own boundaries as if they are sacred lines, right? Sacred lines that can't be crossed, because if you don't uphold them, no one else will. So that the main important parts of this is the reframe of the story, which is realizing that what happened to your boundaries previously are not normal or a standard for your future, and then understanding that your boundaries are really sacred, right? Are so sacred. And especially for men, because men do a lot of things for each other in business and other people because we have this high sense of honor, right? I need to do something for you so that I can get something in return. That is like coded into men, which is why business works, right? You pay for something, you receive value, right? You give value, you expect to receive money for that. So men in business all the time, our idea of masculinity is business transactions and business trades, whether it's business, work, whatever it is. I'm doing something for a certain thing. So we're always doing something to give plus receive some equal or more value, right? So when it comes to boundaries, right, boundaries may have the thing where it's like, I'm receiving all the value, for example, or I'm taking all the money and I'm not giving any value. I'm receiving all the value and I'm not giving any money. That's like a story that we make up in our own heads when it comes to putting in boundaries, because you're stopping the flow of this give and receive thing to maintain yourself, right? Maintain your sense of being. So what happens is you're forced, when you're using boundaries, to increase your own self-worth. And then your self-worth equals your net worth, which is the power of boundaries. Does that make sense to you? You guys, oh my goodness, this is so insane. Yes, this is so much new knowledge. I never knew this. It took me so long to understand this. I remember I did a course on boundaries and I got through like first 2-3 modules and I'm like, I still didn't grasp the concept of what even a boundary is. I didn't get it. And it wasn't until that I learned what boundaries was and then started living in relationships with my parents and an ex-partner and being in business and all the things that I was like, wow, I can't believe no one taught me this earlier. How come this wasn't a skill that I didn't learn when I was a kid? And then as soon as I learned how to implement boundaries, it felt like I had stopped forcing and putting energy into everything, and I was just started receiving more. I was becoming more magnetic, right? And living a life that I wanted to live, not one that I was trying to force to live. So if you guys like this, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're watching this at the right time, we've either got a quiz which you can use to test your own magnetism. So go check that out. You can see your magnetism score. It's super fantastic. Or we have a 7-day challenge running. You can click the link below. You can come join our 7-day magnetism challenge. Big love. See you guys in the next one.